The topic that we bring you today is what is naloxone, uh, and stopping the stigma of medication, bringing you about the both polars and the stigma of treatment. You know how MAD creates the stigma, being a treatment that's assisted with medication and group support. So we're going to bring you part of that information on how that works, how that's given to individuals that are find themselves in the addiction cycle. So again, my name is Juan Jimenez. For those that just joined us, with my colleague Julian Olmos, Sarah, and Morgan. And we bring you today information on naloxone. So we're going to give you an in-depth information what naloxone is, when it comes to the actual medication, what it does. We're going to give you actually a simple video that describes the simple steps on how this medication is given in a case where the individual is in an overdose state. So we are going to give you those pieces of information. We are going to introduce pieces of how the Good Samaritan law works in conjunction with naloxone and the physiology of opiates. So quick introduction, like I said earlier, my name is Juan Jimenez. I'm here with Julian, Sarah Green, and we have Morgan, which is our therapist clinician from Phoenix House. And we're part of the Youth Opiate Response Team. Youth Opiate Response Grant is the first of its kind in California, bringing about the first educational pieces to the community. We serve the San Fernando Valley and surrounding areas, and we bring about the information what opiates are, what are they doing in our community, because there's a opiate epidemic in the United States where opiates are essentially killing people in overdose states. So our topics for today, like I was saying earlier, for those that just joined us, was what is naloxone? What is this medication that reverses the effects? And we're going to give you a little more in-depth information when it comes to its actual medication and its implementation in the medical world. We're going to bring information on the Good Samaritan law, how that connects with naloxone, how are the opiates affecting our country, so some statistical data, the physiological part of opiates and how it affects our brains, the withdrawal symptoms, which connects to how MAT is essentially a very successful treatment. Opiates is one of those substances that has heavy withdrawals, and individuals that find themselves wanting to change find themselves in this cycle because of how their body responds to withdrawal. So we're going to give you some information that's sometimes not generally given when it comes to opiates and drug use, and why MAT is so important for the treatment of individuals that are seeking treatment. The stigma around MAT, medically assisted treatment, is the acronym. And what can we do as providers, as parents around MAT, and how we could bring about a different perspective on MAT and how it's actually really working. So let's begin. We are doing the naloxone first. So naloxone, for those that have never heard of naloxone, it's sold under the general brand of Narcan, which is one of the most popular versions out there. It's usually sold in these packets. There's two dosages that usually come in these packets, and it's two dosage. They're 2 milligrams each, and it's a nasal spray for the most part. Naloxone is a chemical compound that's been designed to counteract the respiratory arrest and overdoses in individuals. So usually when individuals are in an overdose state, when they say overdose, it means they've stopped breathing. They'll probably most likely have a pulse most of the times, but they'll start breathing. And they start breathing because opiates attack the part of the brain, one of its main parts, that are involuntary responses that are like breathing. We don't think when we breathe. Go ahead, Julie.
So there's a part of the brain that controls the breathing. Opioids are almost the exact same shape as endorphins. Endorphins are what make you feel good. Opioids are almost that shape, except that they have a little bit extra, you could say, and that extra part covers the part of your brain that gives you the signal to breathe. So when you take too many opioids or opiates, um, the part of your brain that tells your lungs to breathe is blocked. So what you take, what reverses that is Narcan. Narcan has the same shape again as opioids. It has the same general like structure as opioids, except that it lets the signal to breathe pass through. So when whoever is overdosing on opioids gets Narcan, Narcan is the same shape, but it has a stronger affinity to the opioid receptor. So it can knock off the opiates and it can cover that receptor so more opiates don't bind there, and it lets the signal to breathe pass through. Um, this is amazing life-saving medication because there are other drugs that reverse other overdoses, except they have devastating effects on the body. Narcan or naloxone actually has no effects other than reducing an overdose, other than reversing an overdose. So if someone is overdosing from another substance and you give them naloxone or Narcan, they'll be completely fine. However, the opposite is not true. So if someone is overdosing off of a benzodiazepine, for example, and you give them the drug that reverses benzodiazepine overdoses, they'll actually suffer from a lot of fatigue. They'll be very they'll have like extreme flu-like symptoms, for example. However, Narcan does not give any of those side effects, which is why which is why it's a medical marvel, a medical miracle. Because the opioid crisis is happening all over the country, and what they needed was something that could reverse overdoses. I mean, almost instantly, and that's what naloxone is. Um, there are some cases where an overdose can be where someone took so much of whatever opioid that they took, whether it be fentanyl or heroin or whatever opioid they took, that naloxone, once it's out of the system, they'll actually overdose again because what naloxone wants to do is it binds to the opioid receptor, and then your brain and your body is naturally getting rid of the opioid. It's being absorbed and it's being you could imagine that it's being digested by the body, right? Um, so sometimes that there's so much of the opiate in the system that the 45 minutes, that the 30 to 45 minutes that naloxone is working actually isn't long enough. And so when someone takes naloxone, they're also supposed to be admitted to the hospital and they go in and they're being intake. And it's because if they did take a dose that would cause the overdose to take place longer than like an hour or 45 minutes or however long, they could go into another overdose, and then they actually need another dose of naloxone, and then another dose and another dose until the opioids are out of their system. Um, so that's what naloxone is. That's a sort of a brief, as simple explanation as I could think of for naloxone. Um, there's a lot more that goes into it, but for now I think that's good enough. And then if you guys do have any questions about that, feel free to type them into the chat box. We'll also go over them after the main portion of our presentation.
And just to elaborate just a little bit more, naloxone is it's basically over the counter because you don't need a prescription at this point. And we have tested those policies by calling several pharmacies, and you can buy naloxone. It is covered through your major insurances and through other sources of funding. In some cases, it's very either very low cost or free. for the most part. So it's a medications that's been and it's not only, for example, people will ask, oh, so is this something only for individuals that are abusing substances? And the answer is no. It could also be given, and I would recommend individuals that are on pain medication, that are opiates, because we all have different physiologies, and we all react different to different medications. You know, some people are sensitive to antihistamine. Some of the people are sensitive to opiates, and you never know when
Hmm.
you might have accidentally forgotten you took your medicine, your opiate medicine for pain, and you accidentally take another one. We live a
Yeah.
busy life where sometimes we forget what we just did 35 minutes ago, 40 minutes ago, uh, and it's
If
something.
there are opiates in the house, there should also be Narcan in the house because you never know, and because there's no side effects to taking Narcan. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
All right. So in our next video, we're gonna show you a small clip that introduces how Narcan is brought into in individuals that suffer from overdose.
So it's actually really easy. As soon as you see that an overdose has happened, you'll probably have Narcan nasal spray. All of these other forms are actually being phased out. Um, so you'll get Narcan, and then the first thing that you do, take it out of the package, hold it just how the cartoon is holding it, and it's as simple as just holding it up to someone's nose, making sure that the device is all the way in, and just pressing down on the pump. And that's how easy it is to reverse an overdose. That's how easy it is to possibly
And the
save someone's life.
effects are sometimes almost instant, in some cases taking 1 to 3 minutes, depending on how many
Hmm.
bits the individual has. So the reaction, because it goes straight to your brain, is almost instant.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, before you do, you have to suspect an overdose, try to call the person's name. Um, you can rub your knuckles on their chest, on their what is
Chest
that
plate.
bone called?
Chest plate.
Yeah, on their chest
The
plate.
chest rub.
Um, yeah. So you want to wake them up. You want to make sure that they're in an overdose before you give them the Narcan. But even if they're not in an overdose and you give them Narcan, they're going to be fine. There
Yeah,
are
and
no
like
other effects.
Julian was talking about the chest rub on your chest plate. It's probably the most common, either from using vocal to wake up the person, because if you rub your chest on if you do it on your own, it's really weird, and it's actually kind of painful, and that's one of the most common ways to wake up individuals. And if
Hmm.
there's no response to that, then we could assume that there's either a potential overdose or more um, threatening health effects at the moment. All right, so moving on to the Good Samaritan law, and we're just going to go very brief on the definition of it. No person who, in good faith and for compensation, renders emergency medical or non-medical care at the scene of emergency shall be liable for any civil damages resulting from an act or omission. And so this law, where most states actually have some type of law, and this law, some version of this law, what it does, it protects the individual providing first aid from any liability. So, for example, if you're driving down the road, you see a horrible vehicle collision, you pull over, you see the driver that's bleeding profusely from, let's say, an artery on the leg. You try to stop the bleeding. The emergency personnel don't arrive on time. The individual expires. The individual dies. Then, by you providing medical help, you will not be liable for any liability if, for example, the family decides to sue you because you weren't able to stop the bleeding properly. So by you providing just first aid, you are protected by helping individuals. And like I said, there's a piece of legislation for most states that cover you from providing help.
Hmm.
And we explained this as part of the overdose with using naloxone, because what happens if you use naloxone on the individual and he expires? You will be protected. You were just providing first aid help. Providing naloxone, it's considered on the scope of first aid. You are not actually doing something extra.
And it,
Because,
it also it also counts for like if there's someone that you see like trespassing in the park or something, and you have naloxone, and then you see them like overdose on opiates, and then you go into the park and you give them naloxone, you call the paramedics, and then like the police and firemen and everyone show up, you won't be cited for trespassing because you were because of the Good Samaritan law, you were trying to save someone's life. And it would be the same thing like if someone was like drowning, and you start doing CPR, and on accident you break someone's rib, you won't be sued for breaking the rib because you're trying to save their life. The Good Samaritan law will protect you. So there's a lot of little logistics like that that also come into play from the Good Samaritan law. It's not just in case of someone's death. It's like if someone is hurt, or if you have to break down a door to get to someone, and you're saving their life. It's for all those little things like that.
and why do we explain this? We explain this because in some of these situations that, for example, we provide group support to the youth, and they might find themselves in shady circumstances where there was
Mm-hmm.
drugs involved, and they're afraid of calling 911 when they see their friend overdosing or passed out because they think, hey, I'm gonna be arrested by calling 911. Maybe that person wasn't using drugs, but he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time with those people. They would be protected. I mean, they're protecting
Mm-hmm.
the person's life for the most part.
Yeah.
So moving on, how are opiates affecting our country? So, statistical data showing that the deaths are increasing from opiate overdose from 2017. This is 2018 information. So, 7.6 people uh, every hour are dying because of an opiate overdose. And this is due in part a lot to the naloxone education out there. Not a lot of people know that naloxone, first of all, there's some organizations that do provide naloxone for free, and the other ones at low cost. That's in due part, and because when there's an opiate overdose, one of the most common things are the respiratory arrest, and we know that if we don't receive oxygen to the brain between 6 and 8 minutes, you sometimes have severe brain damage and death after that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very time sensitive situation when it comes to overdoses, and that's why there's so many of them. 67,000 as of 2018. 2019 data has not been released yet by the CDC, and I'm assuming that it should be released sooner or later. They're swamped with this whole COVID information processing that's going on, so that's also delaying some of the information to be released to the public. Um,
Also, um, so 67,000 reported deaths due to opioid overdose. Those are mostly first responders that report the deaths. However, if there's like a transient person who is found dead, most of the time there would not be an autopsy. It would just be like natural causes. However, a lot of those are also opiate overdoses. Also, opiate overdose deaths does not include opioid overdoses, period. So there are, besides the 67,000 people, there are maybe even 2 or 3 times as many who are just overdosing from these drugs, and their lives are being saved by the first responders. However, they're not in this category because they didn't die. So 67,000, you can multiply that number by the people who aren't found. You can multiply that number by the people who survived, and that's about how many overdoses there are in the United States currently. Um, there's also a really unfortunate practice of that goes on with like street drugs. That, oh, I heard so and so overdosed from this drug. Oh, who was his dealer? Let me go buy from him, because obviously they have the best whatever substance. So that practice is also going into the overdoses of all these different people.
And other affections that are part of this equation are, for example, the treatment availability for the youth population is very limited. That's one example why our program is here to provide those treatment options to the youth. Our programs cater to 12 to 24. We also do have adult facilities, but the adult facilities, like I said again, are limited due to funding, so they could only help a certain amount of people at a time. Matt being a very highly effective way to combat withdrawals, is very effective in, because it's a very, it's not just giving medicine to someone like we're going to talk about in a little bit, but it's a complete package with group support,
Hmm.
and it's given with so medication part of it to take care of the withdrawals, the group support to be able to interact the individual with other people that are going through the same thing, um, learning from experience, working with individuals in the youth sector. They're able to communicate feelings better amongst themselves that are going through the same feelings,
Yeah.
versus the people that are not. So very highly treatment that comes with med, and also opiates, which is not just heroin, the other stuff that we find in the streets. Opiates are very addictive painkillers too. So they're found in the prescription side and the illicit side, being
Hmm.
fentanyl and heroin.
One of the biggest barriers for treatment for opioid users is actually the withdrawals. So, if that's one of the biggest barriers for treatment for opioid users, Matt takes away that barrier. And now suddenly treatment becomes a lot more reasonable, a lot more realistic for opioid users. And that's the goal of Matt, is to provide treatment for as many people as possible.
All
I
right.
think you go to the next slide, Juan.
And we're going to touch base. Julian's going to touch base on the physiology of opiates and the interaction with our brains. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Julian.
So your limbic system controls emotions, your fight, flight, and freeze response. Opioids affect this part of the brain and give it a euphoric response. Opioids also affect the part of your brain that controls breathing, called the medulla oblongata, and it slows down breathing. If you take too many opiates, it can slow down your breathing to a complete. It can slow it to a complete stop. So what does that mean? So this means that although there's a feeling of pleasure that comes from this drug, taking too much of the drug can result in a complete suppression of breathing, overdose, and death. As we discussed before, not all overdoses result in death. However, taking too many opioids can result in death. Um, so the next one is tolerance. Tolerance is defined. Oh, thanks, one. Tolerance is defined as a need for an increased dose of an opioid to achieve the same effective dose. So you need to take more to feel the same effect. The development of this phenomenon can lead to increased overall pain due to acute withdrawal symptoms, with usual consequences of escalating overdose, with escalating doses of opioids. So that means that let's say you were prescribed an opioid for a broken wrist. You take your opioids for your broken wrist. Maybe you start taking too many. Now it's not just your wrist that hurts. It's like your back, your legs, everything hurts. So when everything starts to hurt, that overall pain, you're actually feeling withdrawal symptoms. So that's actually the drug leaving your body, um, and your pain receptors sort of like turning back on, you could imagine. And so throughout the day you have a sort of like daily discomfort, like maybe your shoulder hurts a little bit, or maybe you're a little bit sore or something like that. um, so opioids turn all of those things off, and the signal is still trying to get to your brain, so it gets turned up. When the opioids leave your system, and all of those turned up signals now are hitting your brain. Now all of those signals hit your brain at the same time, and now suddenly everything hurts, and those are acute withdrawal symptoms. That's just a little feeling of what most opioid users actually go through. Juan, you could go to the next one if you want. Thanks. So what does that generally feel like? You'll feel pain in your muscles, as in like all of your muscles. They'll start to wake up and you'll feel all of that daily discomfort in a very extreme way. Also, so opiates slow down and sort of shut down a lot of different body symptoms, a lot of different body mechanisms. So a symptom of the withdrawal is that all of those will start to turn back on. So one sign of opioid use is constipation. And so one side of a symptom of someone withdrawing from opioids is that they'll actually get diarrhea. And then they'll get a sensitive stomach, which leads to vomiting and nausea. So all of those mechanisms turning back on will also lead to a lot of restlessness. Like you can't breathe, you're not comfortable. Like everything is making you sort of like get anxious, and you feel very tight. Your sweat glands will start to overreact to everything. Your mood will be generally discontent. You'll have some anxiety. Your eyes will start dilating. Your tear ducts can start overreacting. You'll get very watery eyes. It's also very common for abdominal cramping, fast heart rate, excessive yawning, goosebumps, insomnia, and tremors. And these are all signs of withdrawal. So is withdrawal overall dangerous? While these symptoms do not cause death, opioid withdrawal can be extremely uncomfortable. And it's recommended to detox under the supervision of medical professionals, because if you have maybe heart issues and withdrawal is causing a fast heart rate, you would want someone to monitor that. Most of the time, a lot of people who quit using opioids cold turkey, they'll go through that whole withdrawal process. And because it's so painful, a lot of what they're referred to as old timers in the recovery community, a lot of them feel like that helps them not want to go back to the drug. But a lot of that is sometimes conflicting, because then not wanting to go through that will make someone not even want to get help in the first place. So it's a lot of back and forth, and that's why there's so much sort of like controversy within the medication assisted treatment community. So can symptoms be managed? Yes, they actually can. So medication assisted treatment, withdrawal symptoms can be managed, and the causes that led to a person towards addiction can be addressed. So just how we were saying before, that the what keeps a lot of people from going into treatment is that they don't want to go through withdrawals. Now when you remove that barrier, now you can start addressing all of the other things that were leading the person towards addiction. A lot of people use addiction and drugs as coping skills, so you can help them replace those coping skills. You can address all of maybe their other traumas, their hidden traumas that led them to addiction, that led them to the drugs. Medication assisted treatment helps you remove one obstacle of treatment, and it's what some people refer to as one of the biggest obstacles in treatment. So I think you can go to the next slide, Juan.
All right, I just wanted to kind of emphasize a little bit what you were talking about, Julian. Looking at the opioid withdrawal symptoms timeline here, I always, when I saw this, it just reminded me of the clients that we've worked with, and how some of them will describe that. I see this kind of like a matrix. Like you have individuals that don't know about medically assisted treatment, and they're maybe trying to stop, and they find themselves feeling all of this at the same time. So if you were to imagine yourself feeling all these symptoms and feelings at the same time, it's some of the reasons why opiates are in the withdrawals it's so hard to stop. And with bringing MAT, medically assisted treatment, into the treatment, how it works, why it's so successful.
It's also helpful to keep in mind that this timeline isn't definite. It's not exactly only 72 hours you'll feel these symptoms, or exactly only 20 days you'll feel these other symptoms. Sometimes it could be more or less. So it could be 72 hours. It might be like maybe a week. It could be 4 to 20 days. It could be 4 to 30 days. I know that post-acute withdrawal syndrome, or pause, post-acute withdrawal symptoms can last anywhere from 6 months to 2 or 3 years. And it all depends on how much someone was using, um, if they've relapsed during their treatment. All of these things are not a one size fits all type of deal. They're all tailored specifically to each client,
Right.
and they all take their time to go through.
And that's why it works, because of the tailoring.
Hmm.
All right, so let's move on a little bit. Were you done with this one, Julian? Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
All right, so now we're going to introduce Morgan, which is our clinician, and she's going to be talking about the components of MAD and how they all work together in conjunction.
Everyone, please
Morgan.
welcome
Hi,
Morgan
everyone.
Wallace.
Hi, everyone. So as Juan and Julian were already touching on a little bit, medication-assisted treatment is more than just giving someone a medication to control the withdrawal symptoms. They're also seeing a therapist individually, often group therapy as well. Throughout their time in treatment, we're constantly assessing how effective the treatment is, and that includes the medication as well as the therapeutic component with their treatment team. In therapy and in group therapy, they're identifying triggers, underlying issues, like they said, that may have led them to seek substances as a coping skill in the first place. So we're really providing full comprehensive care for them. The medication really just allows them to not have to deal with the withdrawal symptoms, which can be very distracting, and as they mentioned, can cause people to not seek treatment. And we're able to take that kind of away from the forefront and instead address all of the underlying issues that led to them using substances initially and continuing to use substances as a coping skill. Can you go to the next one, Juan? So as we've kind of been touching on, there's a stigma around medication-assisted treatment. So just addiction in general, has quite a large stigma surrounding it. There are certain recovery communities like AA and NA that have a very abstinence-based model. So using medication in your recovery kind of goes against their approach to treatment. However, just like when you go to the doctor, if you have a cough, they would fully assess you and determine kind of what treatment or medication you might need to treat that cough. They wouldn't just give every single person that comes into the doctor's office the same medication if they have a cough, right? They would want to do a full assessment and see what would best meet your needs. Therapy is the same exact way, right? We want to fully assess someone and determine what's going to be the best for that person. For some people, going cold turkey or the kind of abstinence model is effective, and for some people it's not, and they really need that support to manage those withdrawal symptoms, to actually begin addressing the underlying issues. Medication is different than drugs also. Medication is prescribed by our psychiatrist, and they determine kind of the appropriate dose for that person. Again, we're constantly assessing them throughout their treatment to determine how much they need, whereas if someone's using drugs, it's obviously not regulated, and it's more as a means of coping and to get high. This is to help them recover and no longer be dependent on drugs as a way of coping. I think that's it.
And that sort of also speaks to self-medication. A lot of people self-medicate with whatever substance they're taking. And that they're actually trying to address issues that they know that they have, or maybe they're aware that they're an issue, but they're not aware of the right treatment, and so they try to self-medicate with whatever XYZ substance. But because they're not maybe practicing coping skills, because they're not talking to their therapist, going to groups, because they're not maybe setting up a schedule of how to maintain sobriety, because they're not doing all of these things, then all they have to turn to is the substance that they're taking, the drugs that they're taking. And that's why so many addicts actually got like obsessed with this or that substance. It's because sometimes they feel like, well, this is all I have, this is all I know, this is the only thing that's been helpful to me. You'll hear that a lot when you deal with people who are going through addiction, is that this is all I have, this is the only thing that helps. And what you kind of want to say, sort of to like rebut that, is this is the only thing that has helped so far. What else have you tried? How long have you tried this or that? And so
Right.
that's sort of like the mindset that you want to try to get your clients or the people that you work with into, is like, yes, this is the only thing that has worked. However, this is the only thing that you've tried so far, you know.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, Julian. And, you know, substances are really, really effective at working quickly, right? We can take a drug or drink and we feel, you know, quote unquote better, or we don't feel anything at all pretty quickly. So we are having to teach clients different ways of coping that might not be as immediate, which is difficult because they're used to that immediate relief, if you will. So trying to engage them in support systems, develop like through groups and things like that, and then develop coping skills that may not be immediate, but that don't cause long-term harm in the way that drugs do, because you might be using drugs and feel better immediately, but the problems and the issues that you were dealing with don't go away. So then you're sober and all of those things are still there, and often they feel worse, which leads to people continuing that cycle of abuse.
mm-hmm.
All right, so let's continue forward. So what can we do about the stigma around Matt?
So one of the things that we can do is what we're doing here today, right? So providing education. So providing education to your clients, to kids that you may work with, to your children if you're a parent, just really talking about addiction from a disease standpoint rather than a choice. So just like other diseases or illnesses, there are various forms of treatment, right, that we can use to treat those things, some of which include medication, some don't. So really providing that education and understanding that treatment isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. Some people may benefit from medication-assisted treatment, some people may not. It's really dependent on that person and where they're at in their life and what they're able to, kind of what sort of support they need. The next piece is to really focus on and change our language. So again, just talking about addiction from a medical framework. So there tends to be a lot more shame and just like stigma in general around addiction, as I was saying. So we tend to view it as someone's choosing to abuse substances or use substances to cope, where they may have initially made that choice, but when they're in the point of addiction, they're chemically and physically dependent on this substance. So it's no longer just a choice that they're making. Again, it is a disease. And so changing our language and using person-centered language as well. So not first identifying someone as a drug addict or an alcoholic, or, you know, identifying and recognizing them first as a human being, just like we would with anyone else. You know, if someone has diabetes, we don't, you know, first identify them as a diabetic. We identify them as a person who has diabetes, right? Same thing. Someone should be a person who struggles with addiction. Did you want to add something, Julian?
No, I think that's pretty good.
Okay. And then the last piece is compassion. So all of these really go together, honestly. So we should approach someone who is struggling with addiction with compassion rather than blame, punishment, or, you know, stigma. Again, they're struggling just like anyone else who has a disease or, you know, mental health disorder. There's a reason why substances became something that worked for them to cope, right? So there's typically underlying issues, whether that's trauma or another mental health disorder that they're trying to, as Julian was touching on, self-medicate. So really just approaching that person from a compassionate standpoint and trying not to place blame or judgment on that individual.
Also, Morgan, on the compassion side, I've learned working with clients, one of the basic things that you could do for compassion is just listening. just having that
Mm-hmm.
ear and not providing any feedback which concerns like with judgment, hey, why are you in drugs or anything like that. And sometimes that
Right.
small little piece engages and could lead, now that you guys know what MAT is, Matt, you guys could give that person options. Hey, have you heard about medically assisted treatment? I've learned about the withdrawals, and maybe from there that could lead to something else and evolve into the person seeking treatment. So
Yeah,
question for you.
absolutely. That's a great point, Juan. Usually by the time people are at the point where they're seeking treatment, they have been told, that they have a problem. They've been, maybe in arguments or yelled at by family members or other people. Us us doing that same thing doesn't provide that safe space for them to really be open and honest about what they're struggling with and what maybe led them to use substances in the first place. So Juan's absolutely right. Just being able to listen and be there to provide support rather than, to provide answers, but just to provide that open space for them to talk and share.
So that basically concludes our naloxone introduction into stopping the stigma of medication assisted treatment. But here's the other important component: how to get in touch with us, how to get in touch with uh, the MET program for the most part, and how to, if you guys find a friend or a family member or someone that just might need services, contact us. Just give us a call, ask for the Your Team. The operator is trained in all the programs that we currently offer to the community, and start the dialogue. It doesn't hurt. Also, here is our social media platforms. If you guys have your cell phone with you on right now, you could scan the QR codes and it'll take you directly to the Facebook link, Phoenix House. Like us, we're always posting a lot of information. Our Instagram, we're very active on Instagram, always provide information with services that we provide to the community on a weekly basis.
And
So,
all of the sorry,
go
and
ahead.
then all of the posts and all of the trainings that we're going to be doing, they're going to be posted on Instagram, for sure, and I think Facebook as well. But I know that Instagram for sure is going to be having them. So if you guys want to follow us on Instagram, and just see, hey, I wonder if there's a training this week. I wonder when the next food drive is. I wonder when the next whatever service is. You can follow us on Instagram, and it's going to be there. Um, so yeah, so we're gonna be doing all that on our Instagram. And Cheryl says if we can go back to the next screen. Can you go back to the previous screen, Juan, for the phone
Yeah,
number?
there you go.
Cheryl, if you want, you could just take a quick picture, and it'll be there. Um, and then also, you can just take whatever picture, and just let us know. The very last slide has our. Okay, Juan, you could go to the next one, to go back to the QR codes. So this is all of our emails, all of our phone numbers. The main phone number, where it says phone, that's the main Phoenix House number. That's our address if you'd like to come in or visit or something. But besides that, does anybody have any questions? Do you want to type it into the group chat? Do you guys have anything that you need addressed that maybe we can help